We all know the place that wise innovation holds in all of our hearts present here today. I don't think I'll be wrong in saying that SPJIMR is one of the few B schools in India which focuses on forging the innovative leaders of tomorrow. Continuing on this very path, we have a very special speaker with us today. He's a pioneer in this very field and has written several books like Do Better with Less, From Smart to Wise, and Jugaad Innovation, to name a few of them. He is here with us to share insights from his latest book, The Frugal Economy, and give us his perspective on wise innovation. But before we actually meet him, let's get to know him a little better from our dean himself, Dr. Varun Nagaraj.
Navi, thank you for being here. Thank you for accepting our invitation. For those of you that haven't looked up Navi's background, I think he symbolizes or epitomizes what will probably be the career trajectory for a lot of us if you're lucky. That is, you don't get fixated on just one thing. If you look at his background, you know, he's from Pondicherry, he's French. He and Surya were saying something, which I assume was complimentary about all of us, right? And not only that, he then proceeded to go on to the US. He's a computer science graduate, did a bunch of things that you normally do in the US, became an analyst and a chief analyst at Forrester Research, which is a very, very good market consulting firm. And then proceeded to go to the University of Cambridge, spent a few years there in a lab, helping be the translator between the world of practice and the world of research at Cambridge. And then proceeded to become a famous writer and TED Talk speaker. So delighted to have you here, Navi. Now, if you could switch. All right, throwback time for you guys. Right? This was a slide we showed over and over again through each of our sessions as we were describing what it is the wise innovation model is. And we talked about it as purposeful innovation done the right way. And we sort of said the toolkit of the wise innovator has several tools in it. And we covered a bunch of things. We covered systems thinking and how that allowed you to frame the problem. We covered design thinking and the lean startup method as ways with which you could actually implement something. And we looked at responsible innovation as a way you could anticipate the good and the bad and the possible and the impossible and the seen and the unseen of innovation. Now, I said we might get to Jugaad innovation, we might get to frugal innovation or native innovation, the three things at the bottom, but we didn't. We only had 9 sessions to do stuff. So I had feedback from at least 4 or 5 students sort of saying it's a shame that we didn't get to do Jugaad innovation. Well, so I figured the next best thing to me trying to do a session on Jugaad innovation was to ask Navi to come in and do a session on not only Jugaad innovation, but his next book, which is really around frugal innovation, all right? So Navi, thank you for doing the job I should have done, right? I appreciate it, and I'm sure you'll do it 10 times better than I would have. So without much further delay, let me present the main course to you, Navi.
Good afternoon, everyone. So it's a delight for me to be back at SPJIMR. And believe it or not, it has been actually 7 years since I was here. I think it was an auditorium or another one, where I talked about wise leadership. And today I'm delighted to reconnect with you to talk about my new book, which is Frugal Economy. And Varun and I, when we first connected, so you know, it was through a scholar who studies wisdom. His name is Michael Lux. He's a professor in the US who studies the concept of wise consumers. And he's the one who connected us several years ago. And I've been tracking the evolution of Varun, who himself, like me, has been very kind of like a Renaissance man, moving from different sector to sector in different regions. And when I learned that he's now the dean of the school, I was very excited. And I was even more excited when I learned that the topic that he's going to be studying and trying to impart within this school is around wisdom. And today I will be touching about wisdom, not directly in a very conceptual way, but actually how do we apply wisdom not only in the area of innovation, leadership, but actually your generation, how can your generation apply wisdom to build an entire new economy, okay? So to do that, I'm going to do something interesting is to walk you through my own personal life. Don't worry, it won't last too long, just 30 seconds, to set the context and also show that how one's perspective can also move from being smart to wise over time, okay? So I actually immigrated to the US exactly 35 years ago with the H-1B visa, and at that time the internet revolution was just starting. I worked for 10 years as an analyst at Forrester Research, which is a technology research and consulting firm in Boston. I helped Fortune 500 companies leverage the latest technologies to drive exponential growth. I sincerely believe that more innovation leads to more growth. But then 15 years ago, I had a change in heart. I realized that what matters is not the quantity of economic growth, but the quality of economic growth. Sadly, in the capitalist system, we have optimized the economy to generate what I call bad growth, the kind of growth that actually excludes people and depletes natural resources. For instance, in the US, the so-called richest country in the world, 2/3 of Americans don't have $500 to deal with a medical emergency. And in Europe, a continent that prides of being equalitarian, nearly 1/4 of the population is facing now poverty. Meanwhile, we are also running out of natural resources. By 2030, global demand for fresh water will exceed supply by over 40%. And unfortunately, I just also discovered, I came back to India 2 months ago, and I had a privilege in Bangalore to attend an amazing session that didn't get noticed by the mainstream media, where Azim Premji University researchers unveiled India's first ever detailed map of how each district in India will be affected by climate change over the next 15 years. And their conclusion is threefold. The first one is that over 500 districts, particularly in the northern part, as you can see, and northeast, and also the southern coastal regions, will experience a temperature increase of at least 1% by as early as 2043. And then there are going to be two other major impacts. One is that the monsoon patterns will shift from the south, will be moving towards the northwestern part, and that means that places like Rajasthan will be experiencing heavy rainfalls, something that they're not prepared to deal with. And then the third impact, which is an issue for me because I don't deal well with the humidity. Unfortunately, humidity is going to be extremely high in several places, but particularly this part of Kerala and this part, including Pondicherry and Tamil Nadu coast. And that is a problem because 48% of workers in India work outdoors. Okay? So this is going to also be having, beyond health issues, serious economic issues as well. So given these major social and ecological issues we are facing, I begin to wonder, how do we generate good growth that actually uplifts people and regenerates nature at the same time? Some say that the solution is what we call decoupling. That is, build a new economy that keeps growing while reducing emissions. But I believe that the strategy of doing more with less is not enough. I think we Indians can do better with less. Particularly, instead of decoupling, we need to tightly recouple the economy with people, places, and nature. But there's a hiccup, because as to paraphrase Einstein, you cannot build a new economy with the same mindset that built the old one. The current mindset in our capitalist economy is based on ruthless competition, concentration of production, centralized production, big factories, right? And concentration of power. And then thirdly, unbridled extraction of natural resources leading to the depletion. So if you want to build a better economy, we also need to cultivate a new mindset that is based on cooperation, on distribution, and I will go through each of that in a few minutes, and then regeneration. Now, in a few minutes, I'm going to explain, it's going to become very eminently practical for you what I mean by this. But when I wrote the book, what I didn't add, which I'm proud to explicitly say today, is that these three, I consider them as being the three core dharmic principles that we need to employ to build Viksit Bharat. Okay? So, but then we face a kind of chicken egg situation, right? Which is, do we need to build the new mindset first, or do we need to build the new economy first? I suggest that we do both at the same time in a mutually reinforcing way. I suggest that we build what I call a frugal economy that can create more economic and social and ecological value, while at the same time minimizing waste and emissions. I updated this slide. I sent the first version to Hetal, and then I updated this because I read an article that Varun has written on the importance of wise leaders being able to manage paradoxes. My generation, right, we train managers to solve problems. Your generation will have to be trained to deal with paradoxes. Hence, this symbolism, right, of these two images, right, plus and minus. Because you need to figure out, like, how can we continue to grow, especially in India, because there is this kind of new school of thought which is gaining traction in the Western world. It's called degrowth. They are saying that, well, you know, we have grown enough in the West, you know, we have enough material wealth and material success. Now we need to practice degrowth, that is trying to reduce our growth. But that's immoral to practice degrowth in a country like India, where many millions of people still lack the basic, you know, access to, you know, services and products that the West takes for granted. So we need to figure out a wise middle path between the two extremes, which is degrowth, advocated by, you know, hardcore ecologists, and then exponential growth, which is adulated by, you know, hardcore capitalists. And India has always been the country of middle path, right? So the question here, like, you know, how do we build this frugal economy that conceptually looks nice? And I'm a very practical person, so this is the last few seconds where I'm going to be very abstract, and from now on, I'm going to regale you with a lot of real-world examples of how this can be implemented. And the way it can be implemented is by leveraging three pillars that are going to support this frugal economy that I will, you know, expand upon in a few minutes. And these three pillars, as you can guess, embody the three core dharmic principles I enunciated a few seconds ago. Okay? But what's even more interesting is that this frugal economy is emerging and being accelerated thanks to a new generation of wise customers and innovators like yourself. And that's why at the very beginning, I started saying that me and Varun got introduced by a professor, Michael Lux, who studies actually wise customers. This is going to be a huge topic area if you're interested in marketing, right? Wise customers and wise innovators. That's what, you know, you have been studying also here in the school. And so enough with theory. So let's start going into details and show you exactly how there are real life examples of companies and startups that are actually building these three pillars. So I want to show wise innovators who are turning frugal economy into a reality. So let's go to the first principle, which is B2B sharing or business to business sharing. Imagine what if companies stopped competing and learned to share the resources in a symbiotic way. This is happening in different ways. For instance, in Kalundborg, which is an eco-industrial park in Denmark, 12 companies that are co-located share energy, water, and waste materials with each other as an integrated ecosystem. This mutually beneficial sharing of resources among multiple companies is called industrial symbiosis. Okay? In Netherlands, there is a B2B sharing platform called the Flow2 that enables hospitals to share the underused equipment and services with each other. They also help construction companies in Europe to share the underutilized equipment. In the US, there is a Chicago-based startup called Reapply that is helping cities and states across America to build what I call reuse marketplaces. And each reuse marketplace connects companies located in the same area so they can share and reuse each other's idle assets. And this has two benefits. First, by reusing each other's underused assets, companies can reduce waste, which is good for the planet. But Americans, as you know, they care about money. So in addition, right, this is the paradox, or rather the kind of, you need to figure out a way to have the cake and eat it too. So this is good for the planet, but what's for the bottom line? So it turns out that many of the companies that actually share the resources also reduce the cost, right? They don't have to buy new equipment. They can just have access to refurbished equipment from a nearby company. Therefore, they also save money. Okay, so this is also good for the bottom line. And this is important because being wise is not about doing the right thing just for one stakeholder, like even the planet is a stakeholder for me, right? It's about creating value for all stakeholders. And therefore, for me, reusing is frugal in the broader sense because it saves money and it saves the planet. Okay? So this is why I know there is also a competition for wise innovation, right? It's about how can you think systemically so that you can create value through innovation, both for the company and for the society and for the planet at the same time. And the exciting thing, so when I wrote the book, I only paid attention a little bit to India, but I was focusing more on the Western world because I really wanted to show to the West that they can make the transition from a hardcore capitalism to this frugal economy. But then to my delight, in the last few months, I've been also identifying amazing use cases, case studies in India of startups that actually are building the three pillars. So let me show you how Indian startups are using AI to build digital platforms and communities that enable Indian businesses, particularly small businesses, to share their underused manufacturing and logistics capacity. So Vahak is an online platform that connects small truck owners with shippers. They deliver two benefits, one economic, one ecological. First, by consolidating multiple shipments in a single truckload using AI, they increase the fill rate of trucks. So that actually creates more income for the small carriers. And then they also optimize the freight routes, which reduces carbon emissions, which is good for the planet. Zwork is an on-demand industrial marketplace based in Bangalore that connects thousands of small manufacturers across India with big companies. They help small job shops to operating continuously at full capacity, particularly during economic downturns or during pandemics like COVID we saw in 2020. And now they're helping renewable energy companies to massively increase their manufacturing output, like electrolyzers for hydrogen or EV batteries, for example. They make them for them and without owning factories. That means it's an asset-light way for renewable energy companies to scale up the manufacturing without having to invest in expensive factories. Okay? So this is the second example. This is for me, sorry I have to say this, this is smart sharing, as I call it. Okay? This is a way of reducing friction in the marketplace. That's what marketplaces do, right? Uber, this is kind of the Uber, Airbnb, right? Applied to B2B. Nice story. And Bangalore has a lot of these startups. But I want to show you and inspire you what happens if you apply wise sharing to start sharing not only idle equipment, logistics capacity, or factory capacity, but start sharing intangible resources like talent, your employee talent, or knowledge in your company, or intellectual property, and then do that sharing motivated for the greater good. So this is what we saw, interestingly, right, during COVID. So I was actually living in France when something incredible happened in 2020, when France had to depend on China, right? All the masks were produced on China. They couldn't get enough masks. But it turns out that in France there is a mass manufacturer called Kolmi-Hopen. And the problem with them is that they didn't expect to have such a huge spike in demand for masks. So they have to ramp up their capacity to produce quickly. That means they have to reconfigure the factory processes, optimize them, so they can produce 3-4 times larger than the typical volume they used to produce. And they didn't have the knowledge, the expertise. So they asked themselves in a jugaad way a crazy question. What if we can borrow employees who have industrial expertise from other companies, and not companies far away, but maybe right next to us? And indeed, it turns out that right next to the factory, there was another factory of a company called Scania, which makes heavy-duty trucks. And so what happened is that Scania actually loaned their industrial experts to Kolmi-Hopen, and then using their expertise, within a single weekend, they were able to reconfigure their factory processes and able to double the production of masks in record time, saving, of course, thousands of lives. Okay, so this is known by talent sharing. I'm just smiling because it's a polysemic. That means there is no single way to describe this practice. So there are multiple use cases, and by this itself could be an interesting, thesis or study you want to do, is to create a taxonomy of different ways of doing this. So some call it talent sharing, and there are some platforms, marketplaces emerging to facilitate that. Others call it employee sharing. There are different terms, and interestingly, so I don't know about in India yet, it would be fascinating to study, but in China and France I studied, and UK as well, the labor law allows for employee sharing, okay? As long as the company that loans the employees do not make a profit by doing so. Okay, so it's a widespread practice, and I will be happy to discuss with you about this, because your generation, I think, is going to really give a boost to this. Okay, let me be a bit interactive here. Can you tell me why I suspect that your generation, let's say the Gen Z and maybe even the Alpha, will be more interested in participating in this kind of employee sharing mechanism? Yeah.
It'll give an opportunity to try out new things in different industries rather than just focusing on one job in one company.
Any other comment? Any other thought? Other reasons? Yes, so I think you kind of nailed it. So essentially the idea is that your generation is going to look for new perspectives, new experiences, right? And at the same time, you want to have the security of having a salary, right, at the same time. So this is what the Danish people, they call it flexicurity, right? It's a play of flexibility and security. So it allows you to have both at the same time. A flexible job, and you're covered by one employer. And then you can actually, let's say, spend every Friday working for another organization. And if the organization is in another sector, it turns out that not only you as an employee get exposure to new industries, but you come back enriched. This is called open innovation, because you are getting exposed to, let's say you're an industrial engineer, industrial designer, right? Well, you're designing cars, but then you can go work for a medical device company. You can go work for, in the public sector, whatever, right? And then you come back enriched with these, new perspectives, okay? So at the beginning, I think Arun Wataka used the pluralism, right? So the more exposure you have to a variety of industries, the more creative you become and the more resilient you become. And then there is another extra reason, I will forget, but I think I'm going to share with you because it's exciting. A large consulting firm, they wanted me to be anonymize them. So a large consulting firm is doing this, but for another reason. So what they are finding is that the Gen Z is polyvalent. That means that they have multiple competencies. So let's say, I'm hired by this consulting firm to be, an operation research guy, working in management consulting. Okay, so I'm in one practice area in that firm, but then I studied operation research, so I am very good in supply chain as well. So I can spend 20% of my time being assigned to another project in another practice area and maybe working with colleagues in another region. Okay, So this is a way to retain talent. Okay, because this is the emergence of a new generation. Unlike us, right? We used to have one competence, and we try to extract maximum value from what we learned in one job. Not only are going to look for exposure to different jobs, but yourself will have so many different capabilities, so many skills. You want to apply them in different domains. So this is why this is actually beginning, to take off. Now, as I said earlier, this sharing was enabled by the local government in the city where these companies were located, which is in northwestern France called Angers, which has the foresight to build such a platform to enable local companies to share a variety of resources ranging from training programs that they could aggregate and it's a buy-side aggregation, but also allow them to share the employees as well. And it's because that platform was already up and running that when COVID happened, they were able to quickly find employees working for another company nearby. Okay? So why I'm saying that is because I think that this will be a fascinating initiative. Let's say that in India, every state and one level deeper, every district, every city start building these kind of platforms, we could actually increase the efficiency of the economy, but also retain the talent as well. Okay? Now, the next level of sharing, which is more interesting, is what happens if you start sharing your knowledge and maybe even your intellectual property. So the jeans brand Levi's actually shared 21 technologies they developed in-house to produce clothes with much less water. Instead of hoarding, keeping the proprietary knowledge for themselves, they openly shared it with other apparel companies so that the whole apparel sector can become more sustainable. Okay? Now, why this is interesting, this idea of sharing knowledge assets, intellectual resources, right, is because I still remember in 2007, I read a landmark World Bank report that stuck with me. I don't know if you remember, but back then, about 15 years ago, up to 15 years ago, there was a big talk about how India can become a knowledge economy. Do you remember? We didn't talk about service economy. It was the idea of how can we become a knowledge economy. And what the report said is that if all Indian enterprises could costlessly, frugally achieve national best practices based on knowledge already in use in India, economic output could more than quintuple. That means that India can grow 5 times faster and bigger if Indian companies could actually share existing knowledge, particularly traditional knowledge. And the way Indian companies can do is by learning from a community that we always think is not very progressive, which is the farming community. And it turns out that actually farmers do share best practices by leveraging an online platform called Digital Green that allows them to share agricultural best practices, but also replicate proven farming techniques across different regions. Okay? This is a way we can, for example, harness ancestral knowledge about agriculture, and then if it works out in one region, they can up. And now today they have an advanced version with WhatsApp and AI, where the farmer just asks question, or maybe you can just take a photo of a plant and you see there's some problem, some weeds are eating it out or some damage in the crops, and then you send this up in the cloud, and then someone else, another farmer may have the same problem and have solved it, so it will send an answer back with the best practice. Okay, so this is how it's being used today, and this is a offset. What do you call that? It's a program initially developed by Microsoft Research Lab in Bangalore, and then they turned that into a non-profit today. Now, why I'm saying all this is because it all sounds nice, right? But there is also an economic reason for this. PwC estimates that the consumer-to-consumer sharing economy led by Uber and Airbnb will become a 335 billion market this year, 2025. They predicted that 10 years ago. And it turns out that in most countries, the business-to-business transactions in terms of volume and value tend to be around 10 to 15 times bigger than C2C transactions. Therefore, I estimate that the business economy can go rapidly in coming decade and exceed $3 trillion in value. And India can get a big piece of this if we can build digital marketplaces and online communities that enable Indian companies to share the physical and intangible resources as well. And one of my motivation to actually come to India and talk about it is because this is not going to happen in America, at least in the near term. Why? Can anyone guess why? Go back to the principles, remember? I said to make it happen, you need to have a...
So American society is a lot capitalist, so the competition among the companies is very high for them to collaborate with them.
And what is his answer was American companies are very capitalist, so they are more focused on competition. What is one kind of attribute that comes with capitalism that causes difficulty to share?
So there is an inherent competition mindset where you want to become the market leader. So if you want to create that differentiation.
So I totally agree. I mean, I'm completely aligned with you. So but I'm trying to understand, like, now you are competing because what is the value that animates you? That if you don't have the value, you will cooperate. So I'm getting to find the one word which ends with ism, ISM. Individualism, right? America is the land of individualism. So as long as individualism prevails, and with Donald Trump, it's going to be the embodiment of the best you can think about, right? So it's going to be even hyper competition, not just competition. So you're absolutely right. So capitalism extols the virtue of individualism in the idea that it's about meritocracy, right? It's about, if you are good, you should be able to express your full talent and be recognized for it. But then you do so without taking into account, like, how can I use my talent to help others get better, right? It's all about self-gratification and how you become more dominant in a place, the marketplace. So therefore, to my surprise, so when I was studying it, I found very few examples of B2B sharing in any kind, except, that's why I said the smart sharing is taking off in America. Sharing idle logistics capacity, manufacturing, right? That's happening. That's very efficiency-oriented, goal. So you have a lot of platforms. But the employee sharing and the knowledge sharing, I didn't find at all. But where I found the most, I spent 3 years, 2021, 2023, in France and Europe. That's the continent which is teeming with amazing initiatives around B2B sharing. Okay? So let's move on. Now I'm going to talk about the second pillar, which is distributed manufacturing. And this, compared to the comment I just made, is much more globally happening right now. It's happening both in the US and under Trump, it's going to accelerate. We can talk about that why later. But Europe is also, right? Europe is bringing back manufacturing to Europe, this is happening. And then India, great news, it's starting, but still in the infancy. And India can actually not just leapfrog, but trailblaze, unlike China, this new manufacturing paradigm, okay? So let's talk about how manufacturing happens today. Again, the capitalism being, the model, the inspiration for that. So today, the capitalism model is that essentially you produce where it's cheaper and you produce that in large volume, right? They talk about economies of scale. So that you reduce the marginal cost as you produce more and more. So today, let's say that, the clothes and the cell phones that people use in Europe and America are mass-produced in giant factories like Foxconn in China, and then they travel thousands of miles by air and sea before they reach the stores in New York and London. And the company called Shine, by the way, that makes fast fashion. So I think Reliance is in talks with them, so they're going to come soon. And there was a scandal recently because now they're using air shipment for all the fast fashion. So you don't imagine the ecological consequences, right, if they start happening in India as well. Anyway, so this is how it's happening today, right? So this, remember, right, this model is very cost efficient. This mass production model is very cost efficient, but it has two flaws. One, it's not sustainable, right, as I just said. Secondly, it is not resilient. So that's an important term, right? Forget about saving the planet. It's not resilient because it's vulnerable to supply chain disruptions. Okay, like port strikes, or some pirates hijack, they block some, the Suez Canal or whatever happens like that, or also natural disasters that are going to create havoc in global supply chains, or God forbid terrorist attacks, as we saw in 9/11, right, which crippled the supply chains in America. So what we need, therefore, is that thinking in India, how can we not replicate the same industrial paradigm, but embrace a distributed manufacturing paradigm where companies can produce closer to where customers live. So let me show you how decentralized production works. Avadar is a French startup that has developed an electric car that is 5 times lighter than a typical EVs and consumes 3 times less energy. But the real innovation in this electric car is not in its energy efficiency, but the way it's built. Rather than relying on gigafactories like Tesla's, Avadar actually is using a distributed network of microfactories that are located in multiple regions across France. And each microfactory, local entrepreneurs are going to assemble these cars using locally sourced materials for local customers. And the vision of Frédéric Mourier, the co-founder, is to use distributed manufacturing network to create more economic and also social impact in multiple regions across India. And this company has teamed up with the 14 other startups in France, which we call industrial startups, to create what we call the Micro Electric Vehicle Consortium, which aims to share best practices among themselves. And today the MEV market is growing at 15% in France, particularly in the second-tier cities and what we call the peri-urban areas. Okay? So what I want you to think about is that rather than scaling up, think about how you can scale out your production and your capabilities so you can maximize local impact. Okay? So the notion of scaling out, I think, is going to become more important for the Indian context. Question again, why do you think that in Indian context scaling out would matter more? You can see, yeah.
Hi, so my name is Sakshi. So I believe in India there are a lot of places which are still underdeveloped, and if we apply this model to these places, we can create a growth in local economy. So this would help India a lot more in general. So that's what I think about it.
Very good. So it's going to be, you nailed it by saying that. So what you're saying is that it will create distributed growth opportunities.
Yes.
You're right. So that's why behind distributed manufacturing, right, the real idea behind it is that distributed manufacturing becomes a mean to an end. The end is to move to a distributed growth model. By the way, distributed growth and distributed economy is different than redistribution, okay? So redistribution is like somebody produces some economic value and then after the fact, right, I redistribute for equity across states. Here we are talking about truly distributed economy. Any other reasons that you can think about? Yes, please. You can say loudly and I'll repeat.
My name is Ish, and I believe our country has a very diverse terrain, and it is very difficult to get products to places. And if we have micro manufacturing plants everywhere, it would be easier to supply goods.
Yeah. So you use you heard. I mean, so I don't know if you heard that, but you talk about diverse, right? So that for me, when I wrote this particular chapter, I was thinking about that magic word about India, diversity. Okay. So it's because of diversity, I think this model is going to be adapted, because you can actually adapt the product in different regions, right? Based on not only customer taste, it goes beyond that. It's about the availability of local resources. What I haven't told you is that the reason the system is that they're going to be able to use different materials depending on what they can find in different regions, okay? And different skill set as well. And then it's going to go beyond that, and I want, I'm going to tell my next pillar, the climate change. Right? As the climate change impacts different regions differently, I show the picture, right, of the different districts. That also is going to create some supply chain constraints and resource constraints that require you to be more kind of, it's called polycentric, to use the academic term, right? We are moving from a kind of centralized approach to production to polycentric. Poly means multiple centers, okay? And that creates diversity is one. It makes you more resilient. You are not putting all eggs in the same basket by having one gigafactory. If God forbid something happens to that, you're screwed. So the big idea behind this is that we are moving from an industrial model optimized for efficiency to industrial model optimized for efficiency and agility and flexibility. Okay? So interestingly, in India also, there are different startups that are beginning to use technology solutions to scale out manufacturing across India. And this is Lumas. They are building a network of, as we discussed, nano factories that are located in different parts of India. And each nano factory can produce a variety of personalized products, such as healthy foods and cosmetics. So it's also what we call economies of scope, right? That means the same factory can produce multiple products, low volume, high variety, which is different than the Chinese production paradigm, which is high volume, low variety. Okay? Same iPhone, but we can make 10 millions. Okay? We cannot personalize. Okay? But this model is about personalization and localization, hyper-localization. Okay? And what's important is that each nano factory uses less energy, less water, and is more flexible than big factories. And also it reduces emissions and transportation costs because the distance between production and supply, demand is very limited. Okay? This is why I presented all this, is because I studied computer science early 90s when the internet was beginning to emerge. And the internet, as you know, had the promise of decentralizing, distributing everything, right? So I was actually my master's program, which I completed exactly day for day 30 years ago, 1995, was actually to look at what happens if you move. That's why we are going to move to a more and more diverse world environment. So as the world becomes diverse, you need to have, and this is a key word, interoperability. Different proprietary systems, IT systems, must be able to talk each other seamlessly. That's called interoperability, right? And the internet promise was that it will allow different systems to cooperate and communicate seamlessly. To some extent, that vision has become reality. In other instances, no. For instance, the cloud computing is supposed to be distributed, but it's not. It's still very centralized by a handful of companies, right, running big data centers to do cloud computing. So the idea is that what we are going to see is that the physical world, like manufacturing, will finally, after 30 years, begin to move, right, from this dynamic to this one. Okay? And again, empowered by, we talked about different reasons, right? Diversity and the need to create jobs in local areas, etc. But also, strangely, technologies. New technologies like nano factories, IoT, Internet of Things, AI, etc., will allow the decentralization of manufacturing moving forward. So we talked about, right, how could we shift our economic mindset from competition to cooperation with the sharing, from centralized to decentralized manufacturing with the new approach we talked about so far. And now I want to show you how we can shift the economic dominant logic from extraction and depletion of natural resources to what I call triple regeneration. So regeneration is actually an advanced version of sustainability. Sustainable businesses are focused on reducing the carbon footprint and recycling waste. In other words, what they do is they decarbonize their operations, so they reduce emissions, and then they apply what we call the principles of the circular economy to recycle and upcycle their waste. So in other words, they try to do less harm to the planet. But what happens if a business or an entire nation is already sustainable? Take, for instance, Brazil, which generates 93% of its power from renewables compared to 30% globally. So Brazilian businesses, many of them are already sustainable, are now thinking, how can we become regenerative businesses? So a regenerative business aims to boost the health, swastha or arogya, depending on Sanskrit or Hindi, as well as the prana, the vitality of three things: people, places, and the planet. Okay? And they do that in a very synergistic way. Now, what is important in the graphic, and I'm going to just spend 20 seconds, is important, right, is that sustainability and regeneration are not opposite concepts. Actually, they are very complementary and mutually reinforce each other. As a matter of fact, a regenerative business, right, keep creating more value and impact for society and the planet, while at the same time trying to minimize waste and emissions. So let me show you how companies can generate more profit by regenerating people, places, and the planet in a symbiotic way, synergistic way. In the Amazon rainforest, the indigenous tribes used to cut a palm tree called murumuru and use the wood to make commodity products like brooms. But it turns out that you can extract from the seeds of this palm tree a deeply moisturizing butter that can be used to repair damaged hair. I don't need it, but maybe you do. Okay? It turns out that because it's 7 times more valuable, and by the way, so these seeds are 7 times more valuable than the wood of this palm tree. So what that means is that it's 7 times more profitable for the Amazon tribes to keep the palm tree alive than to cut it down. So that's why Natura, which is a Brazilian cosmetics brand and a world leader in sustainability practices, is working with the Amazon tribes to sustainably source this murumuru butter to make a whole range of hair care products. In doing so, Natura is practicing, again, what I call triple regeneration, because they are creating more income for the Amazon tribes. That's the people dimension. They are also preserving ancestral farming techniques tied to specific places in Amazon. And then by regenerating and preserving the biodiversity in Amazon, they're also helping the planet as well. And this year, the Brazilian government is going to showcase about 100 such regenerative business solutions at the COP30 climate conference, which will take place for the first time inside the Amazon rainforest later this year. And India is going to be the knowledge partner and the strategic partner of this program. So my wish is that maybe you can, like you're doing at the WISE Innovation, maybe identify some interesting regenerative solutions coming from India. And who knows, maybe we can figure out a way for you to go present them also, in Brazil later this year. Okay? So think about, right, as a future managers and leaders, right, how can you create these regenerative brands that actually can cultivate a field of aliveness where people, places, and the planet can all grow and prosper. And so we are going to hear about this concept of regenerative brands, which interestingly is a concept that is taking off in America. It's not a country we associate with the sustainability, but that's because Americans are always sometimes, they can leapfrog, right? The way they elected Obama right after 8 years of W. Bush, they have this capacity to sometimes surpass themselves and do kind of the frontier stuff. So they are going directly from sustainability to regeneration. And one of the 3 terms you'll be hearing more and more from America, HBR, right? All these guys will start writing about. One is regenerative brands, regenerative businesses, and regenerative economy. Okay? These are the 3 concepts that I will be hearing more and more in coming years. And that's why, by the way, I am presenting this. Why? Because coming from America, right, these concepts you have to be careful, because what's going to happen is that good intention, first of all, you have to understand why Americans are going into sustainability is because they believe the customer is the king. And it turns out that studies show that 80% of customers in America prefer companies to be regenerative rather than sustainable. Particularly, your generation of consumers find the term sustainability too passive. So you want brands to be more actively involved in having an impact on society and the planet. Okay? So that's one reason US companies are paying attention to this concept. And some corporate pioneers in sustainability, like Interface, which is the kind of granddaddy of sustainability in the Western world, is now moving beyond that and embracing regeneration. And they are building, for instance, factories at forest that actually offer positive, it's a technical term, it's called ecosystem services. So ecosystem services is what nature naturally provides. And that could be air filtration or carbon sequestration that nature provides. And they're trying to figure out, it's called biomimetism. How can we learn from nature and build these factories which offer similar ecosystem services to the local environment, like air filtration, water filtration, or carbon sequestration. Okay? And Decathlon, sports retailer, you know them well, right? French company. And they are building now, this is a pilot project in France, store as nature, which actually regenerates the local biodiversity. You can see the store, right? 70% of the store is green. That's because they are creating a natural habitat that can support the development of indigenous fauna and flora. Okay? So they can come back, the fauna and flora that was gone away, and revive them. Okay? So these are two great examples of how companies can regenerate nature. But I believe that companies also have the power to regenerate people and communities. Because remember what I said earlier, that I said that our existing growth model excludes people. So what if you replace that with a regenerative growth model where businesses can actively contribute to human development and to greater social and ecological harmony? Okay? So this is key because this is how all Indians can achieve Atma-Nirbhar, become self-sufficient and resilient. And I think that Atma-Nirbhar is the foundational step towards Viksit Bharat. Okay? Without Atma-Nirbhar Bharat, Viksit Bharat cannot be sustained. That's my personal opinion. Okay? So let me give you two examples from India of companies that are actually driving this kind of regenerative growth with a focus on people and communities. And planet for them is a byproduct. That means that they're already focusing on planet, but now they're saying, no, we also have to focus on the sustainability of people and communities. So the first example is Celco, which is a social business that has set up off-grid solar systems for over 1 million low-income households, particularly in rural India. And they didn't stop there. If they stop there, it will be just a sustainability story. What they have done as well is they have developed a range of solar-powered equipment that helps small farmers process the crops post-harvest, hence improving their livelihoods. So Celco is a regenerative business that actually not only gives the rural communities a fish, which is clean energy, but teaches them how to fish, which is using the clean energy to improve their income level. Okay? So you can see again, right? It's both sustainable and regenerative with the focus. And 80% of the people they're helping are women who in a lot of rural areas, right, never had an employment before. So it's also very much a kind of uplifting value proposition for women as well in rural areas. And Pakka is a company based in Ayodhya that makes what they call regenerative packaging solutions for food products. And they actually transform sugarcane waste into biodegradable products for food packaging. And their factory is powered 100% by clean energy, bio-based clean energy. But that's not the real story. That's the climate story, right? But what's interesting is the human aspect, because their motto is to waste nothing, particularly women's talent. That's why they have hired and employed and placed women at every level in the organization, which have earned them as one of the best workplaces to work for women in India for the first time this year. Okay? So to summarize, I would say that essentially, and I'm going to be a bit theatrical here, so the climate change is calling all of us to operate safely, right, within the planetary boundaries. You heard about the term planetary boundaries, right? We are exceeding the planetary boundaries, right? Come back within planetary boundaries, right? But at the same time, paradox, at the same time, we in India, right, have to expand the limits of human imagination so that we can develop India equitably and sustainably. How do we do that? Well, the good news is that India is the birthplace, right, of frugal innovation. So we need to actually use what we already have, which is our legendary Jugad ingenuity and our millennia-old Vedic wisdom, right, to build a frugal economy that actually truly matters to people, society, and the planet. And what I invite you to do actually is to, and this is important, right, is to apply the 3 dharmic principles. Whatever career you'll be embarking upon, whether you'll end up being an entrepreneur or even a civil servant, think about how you can apply the 3 dharmic principles of cooperation, distribution, and regeneration, right, to achieve 3 things. Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-sufficient Bharat, Viksit Bharat, developed Bharat, but there's a third one that I want to share with you. I call it Turiya Bharat, which is enlightened Bharat, a conscious, wise Bharat. And that's the tree we need right now to become a beacon of hope for the world. Okay? So I'm going to pause here and see if you have other questions that we can address in the remaining time. Thank you so much.
We'll now open the floor to some questions. We can maybe take one or two of them. Yes.
Hello, sir. I'm Pragati. My question is regarding sharing of businesses in B2B platform or even in distributed manufacturing. In both the cases, there is an issue of confidentiality. Manufacturing firms will not share their assets because of confidentiality, and so will their employee strength. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. So remember that the key word, very good point, right? The key word is I use twice, I think, today. I said underused, idle. That means that, of course, you don't share. If it's always being used continuously, makes no sense, right, to share with anyone else. But the examples I gave are when you are facing a shortfall in demand and suddenly your equipment in factory is not being used full time, right? So then there's a need to optimize the capacity utilization of the machine, right? Because every time the machine is down, you're losing money, right? So, and it's not applicable, but the example I always think about immediately to give you an order of similarity kind of thing is, for example, I think it's like every hour a plane is grounded, right, at the airport without taking off. I think they lose about $100,000 or something. It's huge, right? So the same way, essentially, like, how do you keep the asset fully optimized? And that's where this system comes in, right? Where you say, oh, on Friday, I won't be using it for 4 hours. Oh, somebody else needs that. Can I use that capacity now to create the product for these guys? For the employees, same thing. What we have found is that, the expression in the IT sector, you're on the bench. There's even a new TV series, right, on that, the bench. So at that time, whether keeping them a bench, you can actually loan them, right, to other companies, right? So the idea is essentially like, rather than keeping the assets idle, you keep them fully, utilized. So that is the motivation. And then there is an enlightened motivation coming back particularly for the employees. And I think that's the one use case that I found that I didn't say today, is that it allows you to humanely deal with people who want to leave the company. Okay? So what happens is that, a person says, is in the 40s or 50s, doesn't matter the age, right? But look, I'm willing to explore something else, right? So rather than leaving the company and then, struggling for a couple of months and find a new job, Accenture and two other insurance companies have created a platform where it's called voluntary leaving. So rather than being dismissed or living in a very without dignity kind of thing, so this is a way where you're staying in the company and then over 6 months you can go work temporarily for another organization, and then it gradually you make the transition, exit from one company to another. And then there is another interesting use case. That's why I say it's very, very rich in terms of use cases. It's where small medium businesses can hire, for example, an expert in AI. They cannot afford to hire, right? One company, small medium business, can afford one expert. But in France, there are some organizations, non-profits. They have 300 SMEs who come together and they will hire an expert in AI or in ESG, and then they will share among each other. Okay? So that's a sharing that actually is beneficial for all companies without having to invest, each company, in that particular competence. So, yeah. Yes, I want to maybe take from here and then come back to the center. Yeah.
Hi Navi, first of all, thank you so much for sharing these very, very interesting insights and especially the examples that you touched upon. My question is, when we look at the frugal economy and the things you shared, if we look at from the conventional metrics perspective, what we study right now, the success metrics, what are your views on it? For example, if we look at the distributed manufacturing, we generally study that it has to be quality ensured across the sites. It has to be, let's say, economies of scale, so operating efficiencies. So these are some contrasting views. So what are your views on it?
It's a very, very good question. So it's an important question because, again, being wise is to, in my book I talk about, right? It's about, selectively unlearning and selectively relearning. That means that what I'm saying is that some of the KPIs are still valid, can be applied here, and maybe some KPIs make no sense, right? Like, for example, economy scale, use a particular KPI, right? The volume produced per factory kind of thing. That may not work out. But the idea of coming back, actually, you make a good question, right? The quality thing, no problem. What is happening with the AI, right, is that I didn't even know. I was impressed because I studied this field for 20 years. But with AI, you can actually pre-qualify all these factories, right? Before you have to send an auditor, to go find out. But today, with the data coming in, you can actually see, if the factory meets a particular, quality requirements. So that because you're pre-qualified, some companies will say, I will only partner with a supplier who can meet that quality requirements. And the system has pre-qualified. So therefore, when you place an RFP, a procurement bid, or your purchase requirement, the system will already identify you those subset of suppliers that meet stringent quality requirements. And that's why some big names like GE and NASA are now using this kind of distributed manufacturing platform. And so that's the first point about the quality. And then in terms of the efficiency part, it goes back again to the same idea, is that the idea of Z work, right? You still get the same efficiency in terms of per unit cost. It's just that what they are doing is that, actually, if you want to read that book, Rama Bijapurkar, she's a well-known expert in consumer analytics. I met her yesterday. Her latest book is called The Lilliput Land. And what she's saying, the Lilliput is because, in India, we have, hundreds of millions of consumers, but each have like Lilliput, small spending power. But when you aggregate, it becomes profitable for business to go after. But an aggregation is difficult because, disaggregation is difficult because the Ronald Coase Nobel Prize winning economist theory says that the coordination cost could be very high, and therefore it dissuades company to go after small, customers. But now with the platforms, the coordination costs go down. They do the aggregation for you. They do the qualification, right? The testing, everything. So you don't care because at the end of the day, right, if you're making renewable energy equipment, electrolyzers or something, all you want is that, okay, I'm going to deploy these electrolyzers in 6 different customer sites. You go figure out. That's not my problem, right? You just deliver on time and on budget in these 6 sites the 300 electrolyzers. And where you make them, that's not my problem. And then the system optimizes. They will say, okay, I'm going to take 20 of these orders, give it to this guy, right? And therefore, it's actually efficient from an old, economic, sense in a way. And I think that's what I like about it because it's actually not challenging the existing KPIs we already have. From a customer standpoint, nothing changes, right? And it's just that behind the scene, how it's being executed is different. Okay, so that means that if you are a purchasing manager in these customer companies, right, you don't care, right? Unless you want to stipulate that all these products have to be made in one factory. No one is going to do that, right? For them, all that interest is is it cost competitive, right? Can it be delivered on time? Can it be maintained properly? That's it. And how you make it, that's not my problem, right? So, and then what happens is that today in India, as we embark on this fast growth trajectory, the speed becomes important, right? And the agility, right? Suddenly, let's say, look at what happened, right? Let's say that, here's an example. I know it's very provocative, but, Nano was supposed to be built in West Bengal. Suddenly, the government says you cannot build it. Then they have to go quickly to Gujarat. But the problem with that is that you cannot just open a factory like this. Right? You have to meet the deadline, time to market, right? With this model, no problem. If you want to suddenly, we have to prepone or postpone the thing, no problem. The system will adapt. Okay? So in addition to the KPIs that come from the old world, I think there are going to be new KPIs, and I think we touched upon. One would be like, what is the level of agility you want? resilience. And then also, maybe if with the 2% of your profit being invested in CSR, think how exciting it is if you now say, I'm going to distribute manufacturing, and as your colleague said, I'm going to, doing so, create jobs in different states. And you can say, well, that is also CSR in a way, right? So I'm meeting my business objectives and my CSR objectives. So those will be additional KPIs to be included when you assess, the worthiness of distributed manufacturing. So maybe another question here. Yes, please. I think you guys already said something. So maybe if someone who hasn't spoken yet, I'm trying to be democratic here. Then
Hello.
Last question.
Yes. So we'll take one last question.
Yes.
And I saw there are a lot of hands that went up. So it's going to be around in campus till evening as well. You guys can connect with Sir after the session or offline, or else we can find some online mode of communication as well later on. Last question, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So my question is a kind of a continuation of his. In distributed manufacturing, like you took the example of electric cars. So most of the lithium is being mined in Australia, refined in China, and then goes on to Europe. In any way, France is basically using cars manufactured in and around Europe, right? So how can a company get the lithium and then distribute its manufacturing and still be competitive with the other companies that are working with it? Because its cost obviously will be higher. So what do you think about that?
I think when it comes to lithium electric cars, right, there's no doubt that we still have, everything cannot be hyper-localized, right, the end-to-end chain. So the idea is that, maybe there will be industry by industry, you can again, right, so I'm putting back my forester hat, you can create like a, like a study that looks like, the impact that could maximum impact could have, in which industry. And then you can rank them. You can say like, which industry and which applications, right, this distributed manufacturing could yield maximum benefits, economic, social, ecological. And then maybe the example you give with electric cars, maybe that may be in the suboptimal. It may not be ideally suited for distributed manufacturing. But there could be other domains. For example, like one example that I give in my book is the biomass, right? So the idea is that each region produces biomass. And they don't, it's funny you say that, because let's look at the opposite of the lithium example, right? So what the chief minister of a state in France told me that we think that biomass is like the petrol of tomorrow, okay? So why do we have to take the biomass generated locally and send it to someone else to valorize it, leverage it, right? So we want to create the whole end-to-end value chain in each region, so that, for example, in the Dijon city, which is very advanced in sustainability in France, they are using the biomass created locally to create hydrogen, to power local mobility services, okay? So in that example, distributed manufacturing makes perfect sense, because the whole value chain end-to-end, raw materials all the way to customer base, is co-located in the same region. And then there will be other sectors like electric cars, where a portion of that still will depend on foreign sourced rare materials, and then maybe 70% can be localized, right? So in my book, actually, I talk about that, because this is called the value chain, and look at each stage of the supply chain and see where you create the maximum value. So one of the reasons Trump is going to, do one step further than Biden is that he wants to localize every step in the value chain, so that all value created and captured is happening within America. And he's going to do that. I didn't say that, I hinted at that, right? So what's going to happen is that the 50 states in America are now trying to localize manufacturing end to end, okay? And they are finding rare materials, right? Earth materials in America as well. Oil is going to be, produced in America as well. So all the inputs, as much as possible, they're going to try to source from America. And maybe one state doesn't have, they can always get it from another state within America, okay? So I think from India, I think maybe that's what I'm getting at, is that maybe India also has to look at this end-to-end value chain and figure out, like, because I looked at some of the value chains for different products. Like Europe, we are still very dependent on imported stuff, right? So we need to figure out, that's why distributed manufacturing will not work unless I didn't introduce this other term, which is my book, what I call hyper-localized value chain, right? So it's not just about a factory that you make, right, locally, but the sourcing, right, that has to be localized. And then the distribution has to be localized. So you capture the full value of the value chain, right, within a region. Okay? And that's where America is heading. And China will not do that because being a communist country and the old paradigm is centralized, volume manufacturing. So I think that India has a great chance, to be a pioneer of distributed manufacturing, and by creating these hyper-localized value chains.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I speak for everyone when I say that today we've truly gotten those real-world examples, both within India and abroad, of modern-day Jugaad innovation. And we'd like to thank you for that, sir.
Thank you.
From all of us at SPJIMR, we hope that your book, The Frugal Economy, does wonders in the markets and becomes the bestseller of 2025. All the very best for that. And
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd also like to thank all the members of the Wise Tech Committee, all the faculties who graced us with their presence here, and all the supporting staff. And last but not the least, all of you wonderful audience members. Let's have a huge round of applause for all of them. And before we close this session, we have something, an exciting announcement that's coming up from the Dean himself. Can we have up Dr. Varun?
I actually wanted to thank you, Navi. That was a lovely talk, much better than a 70-minute session I could have done. So thank you, I appreciate it. So Navi has graciously agreed to do something that I hope you guys appreciate. He actually has a meeting outside of campus, but he said he would come back after that meeting with Economic Times, I think. And so he will be back here this evening. I also know you have your gray matter things going on in the evening. So let's figure out a way for you to interact. But I do want to recognize one group in particular, because this group deserves actually extra recognition. WiseTech ran a competition for students to basically nominate what they thought was the WISE Innovation of the Year. It was lovely to see the quality of responses that came in. And from that group, there was a smaller group of students or participants who got picked for their nominations that they made. And amongst their rewards, besides any cash awards, the highlight so far appeared to be a dinner with somebody that they seemed very excited about. But I think there's a much better highlight. Navi said he would love to meet that group of finalists separately, right? And so that group of finalists, even if you happen to be in gray matter, I'd sort of ditch the gray matter thing and show up and come and meet up with Navi. And that's for you. That's a recognition of the extra work that a smaller group of people have put in and delivered good quality work on. And Navi is actually curious to see why you nominated the companies or the innovations that you did. He wants to know, why did you think this was a wise innovation? And we can have a discussion about perhaps maybe one of these three principles that he talked about, the B2B economy, the distributed manufacturing, and regeneration. Are they at play in any manner in the nominee that you have put up, right? So invitation to the finalists to find a time, to come and catch up with Navi. Hetal will be organizing sort of his time, so please do that, since he's graciously coming back from his next business meeting, back again on campus here. So, I take advantage of that, and anybody else who wishes to meet him as well. He will also be associated with us for the TASIC conference that's coming up, and we'll figure out a clever way of making sure Navi's insights inform that conference too. And we'll be seeing all of you on February 21st. That is the morning of the TASIC conference, where classes are not in session, but the expectation is that 9 a.m. to lunch block, where the classes have been canceled, that we will essentially be listening to some world-class scholars who are coming in from around the world to talk about the intersection between technology, business, and society, which is, a topic obviously Navi is also an expert in. All right, so with that, thank you so much for your participation, and Navi, thank you for your association.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you.